Every gardener knows that compost is the beating heart of a thriving garden. We also know there are certain scraps that the guides and books warn us to keep out of our piles: citrus peels, stale bread, and cooked food. These items are always listed on the never add list, said to ruin the pile, attract pests, and stall decomposition. But here's where it gets interesting. While most gardeners do ruin their compost by throwing these materials in carelessly, the truth is, they aren't forbidden at all. In fact, when used the right way, these so-called problem scraps can speed decomposition, energize microbes, and bring your pile to life faster than the usual kitchen waste ever could. The difference lies in method. Let's begin with citrus. Most composting advice says orange or lemon peels are too acidic, that they'll kill off worms or beneficial microbes, and that they'll take forever to break down. The reality is, citrus is rich in compounds that fungi and bacteria actually thrive on once the acidity is balanced. The oils in the rind don't harm soil life, they slow the initial breakdown, which is why they linger if tossed in whole. But shred citrus finely, mix it deep in a hot pile, and it breaks down quickly while releasing bursts of sugar and soluble compounds that microbes love. Bread and cooked foods are another misunderstood group. Left on the surface, they do exactly what you've been warned about. They attract rats, raccoons, and flies. They also clump, go moldy, and create dense anaerobic patches if not treated properly. But bread is essentially pre-digested carbohydrate. To microbes, it's rocket fuel, breaking down in a fraction of the time it takes a leaf or a stalk. The same goes for plain cooked grains, vegetables, or pasta. They're already softened, meaning microbes can attack them instantly, ramping up heat in the pile. The trick is not avoiding them, but knowing how to handle them. The failure comes from one simple mistake: tossing them in without thought. Citrus thrown in whole sits like a leathery lump. A slice of pizza left near the top turns slimy, attracting rodents. Bread tossed in layers together compacts into a sticky mat that suffocates the pile. What seems like a small addition quickly shifts the balance from aerobic to anaerobic, from sweet earthy compost to sour-smelling mess. Most gardeners see the slimy patches, smell the rot, and declare these foods forbidden. But honestly, the failure isn't in the food, it's in the way it was added. Composting is about balance, about feeding microbes a diet they can process at the right pace. Just as we wouldn't thrive on an all-sugar diet, microbes crash when overloaded with one type of material. The first step with citrus is size. Whole rinds can take months, but shredded or chopped peels break down in weeks. Running them through a blender or chopping them fine makes all the difference. The second step is depth. Citrus should never sit at the surface of the pile, where acidity is concentrated. Instead, mix it deeply with bulky browns like straw or shredded cardboard. This balances pH and ensures airflow. Heat is the third factor. Citrus vanishes fastest in hot compost piles, where microbial activity is at its peak. In a cool pile or worm bin, citrus should be added sparingly, because the acidity does temporarily lower the environment's balance. But in a pile that's steaming, citrus becomes fuel, feeding fungi that help knit organic matter into humus. The irony is that what most gardeners fear is actually a fungal stimulant if handled correctly. Bread is perhaps the most wrongly accused compost ingredient. The key is never to add it dry and clumped. Dry bread swells with moisture, forming dense pockets that exclude oxygen. The solution is to tear or crumble it into small pieces and immediately mix it with high-carbon materials like shredded leaves or sawdust. This disperses the starch and prevents clumping. Cooked foods follow the same principle. Rice, pasta, and plain cooked vegetables should never be dumped in bulk. Instead, mix them thinly into the core of a hot pile where heat and airflow prevent odor. A trick that old gardeners used was to always wrap starchy or cooked scraps in a thin layer of carbon before adding them. For example, rolling a handful of cooked rice in dry leaves before tossing it in prevented pests while accelerating decomposition. The high surface area and pre-cooked nature of these foods mean microbes can digest them with remarkable speed. In fact, when managed properly, bread and cooked grains are among the fastest compost accelerators available. The science behind this transformation is simple. Microbes require carbon, nitrogen, moisture, and oxygen to thrive. Citrus, bread, and cooked foods are dense packages of carbon and sugars. On their own, they suffocate a pile. But blended into a matrix of carbon-rich browns, they release energy that microbes devour, heating the pile and speeding overall breakdown. The real fear around these ingredients is pests, and honestly that fear is justified if the pile is mismanaged. But a properly balanced pile doesn't smell, and without odor, pests aren't drawn in. The solution is burial and coverage. Every time a moist, starchy or acidic ingredient is added, it should be tucked into the center and capped with dry browns. This ensures it begins breaking down in a controlled environment rather than just rotting on the surface. In our tests, shredded citrus in a hot pile disappeared in as little as 3 weeks, while whole rinds took nearly 3 months. Bread, once crumbled and buried, often vanished in under 2 weeks. Cooked rice or pasta broke down even faster, sometimes within a week during peak microbial activity. By comparison, leaves and woody stems in the same pile took months. The effect wasn't just in disappearance, it was in heat. Piles with added citrus and bread routinely reached higher temperatures faster than piles with only vegetable scraps. The microbes had fuel, and they used it to drive decomposition at full speed. The broader lesson here is that composting isn't about rules, it's about understanding biology. Many gardeners limit themselves unnecessarily by following rigid lists of what can and cannot go into a pile. The truth is, almost any organic material can become soil if handled correctly. The challenge is balance, airflow, and microbial management. By learning to use misunderstood scraps, gardeners unlock new ways to accelerate compost and reduce waste. Citrus doesn't need to be trashed, bread doesn't need to be thrown out. Even cooked leftovers, when simple and plant-based, can become part of the cycle. It's not about prohibition, it's about technique. When most gardeners toss citrus peels, bread crusts, or cooked scraps into the trash, they miss an opportunity. These so-called forbidden ingredients are not the villains of compost, they are powerful accelerators when used with care. What ruins compost isn't the ingredient itself, but the way it's added. Shred, bury, balance, and cover, and suddenly the very foods you've been told to avoid become the spark that drives your pile forward. Compost isn't a rigid recipe, it's a living system. And like any system, it thrives on diversity and careful balance. Learning to manage these misunderstood scraps means faster, richer compost, and ultimately, a healthier, more resilient garden. If this deep dive into composting gave you new insight, subscribe to Hydrohaven for more powerful soil-building knowledge. Share this with a gardener who still thinks citrus and bread ruin compost, and let's spread the truth that smart methods, not fear, are what make black gold.